Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi and welcome back to That Trippi Show with Alex Ashlow. This week, we are careening towards renaming the Gulf of Mexico to stop drug trafficking, annexing Canada. So yeah, we're less than 2 weeks away from Trump taking over and the press can't stop soaking up every word of his BS and chaos. Even the obvious misinformation that he's spewing, but it goes a lot deeper than that. We'll talk about a study that shows just how bad the misinformation problem on social media is. Alex, where should we get started?
I'm trying to think over the years how many times I have gotten like a red alert, holy shit, you got to read this thing from you. And you share a lot of stuff. You're actually, if not that prone to hyperbole, I think the two things that you've ever shared to me that you're like, stop what you're doing and read it were one, the Nexus, which everyone needs to read, absolutely. And two was this, where you were like, dude, this is really scary because it really is. And it kind of I don't want to say kind of like it didn't seem that scary because it's a scientific journal article. And then you start reading it and you're like, it's actually scarier because it's a scientific journal article.
Yeah, because it's in current opinion in psychology, uh, which is, you know, the thing is, we get into this, everybody's out there talking about, geez, the Democratic Party, it's got to get its message. We have to revamp, do an autopsy on our messengers, policies, the different wings that are too far here, too far there, all that. But when you get right down to it, assuming all that needs to get fixed, and you do, and we do, you still get to this. And these findings are pretty, it starts to explain a hell of a lot more than, should Biden have gotten out earlier or any of these other things.
It's and before you get into the findings, and we'll link to this, it's by Claire Robertson, Karina Del Rosario, and Jay Van Bavel. But to your point, before you get into it, because I'm really excited for which ones you pick here, but it, the message is, as you see, the message is not getting to people, and it's getting when it is shown, it is getting drawn or completely drowned out.
Their findings, and this is a quote: social media is akin to a funhouse mirror, reflecting and warping our collective sense of what is normative. But here's the things that really pop out. Only 3% of active social, accounts on social networks are toxic. Only 3%. But they produce, those 3%, those toxic accounts, produce 33% of all content on social networks and social media. 74% of all online conflicts are started just 1% in our communities. And then here's the other really amazing one: 0.1%, zero point 0.1, not even 99.9% are not in this category, but 0.1% are, of users shared 80% of the fake news on social networks. So put that all into so you've got these 3% of accounts that are toxic, producing 33% of all the content people are consuming. 74% of the online conflicts are started by just 1%, and 0.1% of all users shared 80% of the fake news. And now add to that, if you start to think this through, a, a former president, a leader of the party, basically egging that 0.1%. I mean, all of them, right? Everybody out there in that community. I'm sure there's some on the left, and we'll get into that. But my point is, you didn't have Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Obama or any of them, urging on the extreme elements in the Democratic Party to spread this stuff. They did have that with Trump, a lot of the senators and House members who enabled him. And you put on these numbers that we're talking about, what they found. And it's creating all kinds of other problems. Furthermore, what they found was exposure to extreme content can normalize unhealthy and dangerous behavior. For example, and they take this, teens exposed to extreme content related to alcohol consumption thought dangerous alcohol consumption was okay, was normative.
Right. And
Uh,
there's this, I wanted to, I'm glad you brought that one up. There's this theory, and it's actually, I think it was a takeoff of ensemble programming, but it's called ensemble coding. And they get into this in the study too. And for our listeners, it's kind of this like, it's a shortcut that we take. It's unconscious, but you basically summarize what you see in your head and you kind of make it a norm, but it's all very visual. And they get into, so very specifically, when you think of like groupthink on a social media channel, or in this example, you open up your feed, you see 8 different posts of misinformation. Even if you're thinking, well, really, about one of them, the fact that you're seeing that same misinformation shared that many times and commented on, or even if it's argued about, just because you're seeing that activity internally, there's something going on in all of our heads that says, oh, actually, you start believing it.
yeah, and look, all this, it's not just democracy that's it's wrecking. It's toxic in other ways on platforms like Instagram. There's a norm to present yourself as interesting, attractive, successful. So obviously, young people, people who are looking at all that and looking at all these wonderful, beautiful, and successful people that they're scrolling through, and of course, start to believe, yeah, why theirs sucks. And then you stoke resentment and everything else. On LinkedIn, um, people disproportionately report successes and accomplishments rather than their failures, obviously.
Yeah, I have not seen a
Yeah.
lot of I just got fired posts on
So,
LinkedIn.
this is where they do a really scary deep dive, though, in this study into political discussions. Like in online political discussions, the people who post frequently on social media are often the most ideologically extreme. Duh, that makes sense.
But the numbers are crazy.
Right. 97% of political posts from Twitter come from just 10% of the most active users on social media. Meaning that about 90% of the population's political opinions are being represented by less than 3% of tweets online. I mean, in other words, it's the entire arguments that are being presented out there are coming from 10% of users.
The weird part about it, though, and I think there is a disconnect that I know we're going to get to, but like you compare that to like a poll of real people offline, and obviously no more polling is moving online, and we can talk about how polling error, et cetera. But like, yeah, okay, a 5 or 6% polling error is not going to change this. Most of the time, it shows that most people are actually fairly moderate. They don't really care that much about politics, and they actually kind of avoid political discussions when they can. And by the way, Joe, I would say every week we have a political discussion. I would venture to say that even you and I, in our in the rest of our lives, have a tendency to try to avoid political discussions. So
Yeah, but that's it. There's a marked difference from online polling data. Most people are ideologically moderate, but that's not what you're seeing on these social networks that are promoting. I mean, that's what it's about. It's promoting that 3 to 10% on both sides, fighting each other, screaming at each other, stoking. And then again, like I said, with a leader like Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other voices out there that are stoking their MAGA followers on that's who is controlling that argument and making it seem like we're at each other's throats when frankly that's not really where most people in the country are or want to be. But once you get caught in that, in that doom scroll and the fear and the anger, it becomes it becomes like they said, it's a funhouse mirror. That's not reality.
the scariest one, and by far, and this was a little deeper in the article, every one of those things should just shock you, but They looked at like almost 500,000 users. There's 448,000 users. A third of all the low credibility misinformation posts were shared by 10 accounts, not 10%, 10 accounts. 0.002%. I actually had to go when I did the math on this on the calculator, it showed it as like times negative integer. It was like 2.2 times 10 to the negative. It was like
Point zero zero two.
0.002% of users sharing a third
30,
of the
yeah, a
misinfo.
third
Like,
of the misinfo. And, so they use the COVID vaccine discussion on Twitter. Only 0.35% of people were in true echo chambers, and yet those users dominated the overall discourse. And what they're saying again is that 0.002 thing, where, as you said, they looked at 448,103 users and found that 10 accounts resulted in sharing 33% of the misinformation on X on that issue. At who's urging, who is out there, flaming Dr. Fauci, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you don't have to get into it. And that, I think it's that Funhouse mirror thing that's held up, in front of all of us. And it's a mirror that's not real. That is one, why we need to build social networks and media that deals with reality, that urges a community to spend more time in reality with each other, building trust and doing it civilly whenever we disagree. That's not going to happen on X or Blue Sky or because you have to totally retool the way social networks are built. Now, that's something we're trying to do at Says Us. It's also what a lot of us are trying to do with Resolute Square in terms of providing a platform for discourse with a view, but with a view based in reality and building trust and building a community that trusts each other and moves forward together, which gets to, I think, the article that you really wanted to talk about first, Alex.
oh yeah,
But
from the
yeah,
Atlantic.
but
Yeah.
I think if you describe this Funhouse mirror, that this study, really does a very good job of outlining and describing, and we'll put that, links to it in our show notes. And then look at this article in the Atlantic. Alex, why don't you drive that one?
Yeah, yeah. This was, and I know you shared this on Says, which is where I saw it. Um, it was by Charlie Warzel, who's always a good read, and Mike Caulfield is. The internet is worse than a brainwashing machine. So take all those stats from the Funhouse mirror, and this is a very visual episode. Joe and I have been waving our arms around a lot. Um, you take all those stats and then you kind of weaponize them in politics. And there was a quote from 4 years ago that really stuck with me, from David Graham about January 6th. Remember what yesterday's attempted coup at the Capitol was like. Very soon, someone might try to convince you that it was different. And now, if you look 4 years ahead, there's a lot, and there's some really good quotes in there. And I think this actually kind of it not only shows the depth but the effect of some of those stats. And they write, misinformation is powerful not because it changes minds, but because it allows people to maintain their beliefs in light of growing evidence to the contrary. The internet may function not so much as a brainwashing engine, but as a justification machine. And that, Joe, I think is really what is so, at least in right now with everything Trump does and says, that really gets to it.
Yeah, you can find on social media, you can find affirmation of your view,
And a lot of affirmation, a pile of it.
which locks in, which gets everybody to lock in and take sides and do and it won't matter. It doesn't matter that you argue, look at this fact. No, I saw, I just saw Tucker Carlson say X, and and Trump said Y, and no, there's plenty of justification for your view and reinforcement of it. And so again, if you got 4 years since then of bad info, right? Fox saying that Trump supporters didn't wear black, so of course they weren't rioting. Yet the whole Antifa was, they were the ones who started the violence, and then of course that was versus the argument that there was no violence. Everybody was a tourist. I mean, you can keep going into this, but even suggesting that the Capitol Police were inciting the riot.
All of those questions were very false, but the fact that you saw or people saw many questions all piled onto, like, this is where I think maybe some of the, I think, well-meaning people on our side are missing a trick, where it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, it's all obvious BS. They're doing it for a reason, and as you pointed out, like, psychologically it
Yeah,
works.
no, and that's why repeat the lie, repeat the lie, repeat the lie, repeat the lie, till basically the entire Republican Party doesn't believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected president of the United States. It was rigged. While Trump was president, somehow we rigged it, and we couldn't rig it when Biden had the presidency and the levers on more control. None of it makes sense, but that repetitiveness and the way it reinforces the false belief, where there's always something you can find to reaffirm what you think or want to believe, and again, then that reinforces the tribalism, the polarization. But again, if you think about it as we are now living in a media, social media kind of overriding, the old press. I mean, newspapers, and I mean, first of all, local newspapers disappeared. The networks, cable. I mean, who's watching any of it anymore? I mean, because people have gone online and mobile, and there was a time when people who'd watch football on their cell phone. You do it all the time, and so that's where everything's gone. And the problem with that is particularly on the social networks, it's a funhouse mirror. It's not true. It's not real. None of it. And so we're all living without any ability to do anything. But Joe Trippi sent an interesting article. Well, I'll read that, but there'll be a ton of people who, as soon as they see me be the person who said, "Hey, look at this," will delete it or go read Tucker Carlson or something. I mean, it's people. It's just reinforcing and pushing people into sort of a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, and I think they call it cocooning in the Atlantic, and I think that's a good way to put it, because it's also kind of it's definitely self-inflicted. We do it to ourselves, but it also happens to us. And I think the example they pointed out was, how many times did you see empty Trump rallies, people falling asleep, people leaving, and we all kind of extrapolated because we kept seeing it. We all thought, oh, he's done. Support is waning, and okay,
He's
yeah, you look at that evidence,
unpopular. People are sick of him. They're bored. He's
but
destined to lose. Yeah.
that, because we kept seeing that, it was on social media, it was on the news too. That helped us stay, and they used the word cocooned, in this world where he was going to lose, and it was so obvious when the reality was different.
So the answer to this, though, is again, so if you look back at those numbers, the tenth of a point that are spreading most of the disinfo, the 3% of accounts that are toxic, there's ways to create problems for that group. I mean, for instance, we require a cell phone, a valid cell phone, for you to sign on to the platform. And people are, I don't know. I mean, first of all, why would you trust anybody? You don't trust Elon Musk. You don't trust Zuckerberg. I'm not giving you my cell phone, Trippi. Okay, there's a reason. It's to protect you. Cell phone number means that you have a valid cell phone number. It means you're not a bot. A couple of reasons. Most bots don't own cell phones. And two, big bot farms can't afford to buy 10,000 valid cell phone accounts so that they can register 10,000 bots. So there are steps a platform can take to get rid of those elements that are creating this Funhouse mirror. And we believe it says us that people, yes, a lot of people, we're probably stunting our growth because so many people won't want to do this cell phone thing. Okay, fine. Go live with bots. The 3% of toxic accounts out there spewing hate and division in a false Funhouse mirror at X, quickly starting to happen with the bots invading other social networks that I think mean well, but are not taking these steps. Probably because the VCs, they want a large number of accounts because that means the numbers go up and it's worth more. And so they're not gonna do what they need to do. It's not about letting the bots in. It's about what's easy for for the most people to sign up with just an email that proves nothing. Fake email. You can set up a bunch of emails on Gmail or anywhere. And so what we are doing is constructing a different kind of network where we are taking steps to make sure it's bot free and putting up as many impediments as we can. And then giving the community the power, basically regulate the toxicity of anybody. In other words, your reputation, because we now know you're a human being, you start developing a reputation on Says Us. And if it's a good one, the platform reinforces it. People, on the platform, the community, think your posts are insightful, important, mind-changing. You can disagree with them. You're amplified. And if you're a name caller, anonymous name caller, your reach goes to zero, and soon you're living with the bots. You have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to freedom of reach on Says Us. And so, look, it's work. It's going to take all of us to fight the Funhouse mirror by creating our own networks, our own media outlets. We have to start owning and stop renting. They own X, they own Fox, they own Breitbart, they own a whole bunch of network. It's Sinclair Broadcasting that's in every market in the country. And the chairman of Sinclair Broadcasting, and I've said this before, now he's buying the Baltimore Sun. We rent. We buy ads on Sinclair, billions of dollars, millions of dollars on ads on Sinclair and even on Fox during football games and stuff to reach voters. The owners make more money, buy more media outlets, create more networks. You now have Elon Musk talking about, joking or not, about buying MSNBC. We've got to start owning and building our own, that foster a community based in reality and not in the Funhouse mirror. And look, so I guess this, in a weird way, not weird, I guess I go around this to this point. Yeah. But Resolute Square, that's about creating a media platform for different voices and shows out there that are pro democracy and call out what's happening, and move people into a community that wants to consume that very good writing and shows. At the same time, Says Us, where we're trying to create a social network that doesn't operate the way X's and Blue Skies and everybody else's algorithm does and allow bots to flame things. We're going to try to do something that's really different and needs people to join and help and grow it. So I hope you'll check out both Resolute Square and Says Us. And by the way, there's another, Get Real is another really good site you should check out. I'm trying to talk to Heidi, who started it, and some others, but I'm really impressed with that website. And Alex, we should include a link to that as well. But there's a lot going on. I mean, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of hope with me. I really believe that there's something you can do, that we can build a better social network. We can build a platform of shows and writing that is pro-democracy at Resolute Square and other places. Midas Touch is doing a great job as well. I mean, there are people out there we can unify, build something amazing that can build the kind of messaging and stand up to the disinformation funhouse mirror that's been created and that and that Donald Trump is stoking. We can do that. There is something you can do by getting on board, supporting these efforts, urging your friends to join, and I hope you will. And I know, Alex, we're really getting out of time here because I've been on this rant for a while now. But I did think you wanted to talk about Canada before we signed off.
Do I have to? Yeah, I mean, look, I just think this is a really important point because there's two different. I mean, there's many different, but you can almost break down Trump's bluster, his lies into two kinds, I think. The first is just the really outright intentional stuff that we've been talking about, that chin up his base, that have a purpose, basically self-serving. But there's this other kind, and like a good example there is if you think like he'll say, "Oh, we'll get inflation down right away," that kind of like lie where it's just very obvious and he knows he can't do it. The other ones where he also knows it's probably or almost certainly not going to happen, where they're talking about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, declaring war on Denmark for Greenland, doing the Canada stuff, annexing them, trying to get them to become a state. That's a very different kind of lie. And it's, I think, worth noting, and they're all kind of we too many people fall in the trap that it's all kind of the same thing, but that's like him being a bully. It's like the power tripping, I'm the king, everyone needs to come to me, kiss the ring. I'm going to see this because I want to he wants to try to get away with it. And it's just a very different.
No, he wants to do it. The question is, I mean, he's saying exactly what he wants to do. You got to be really careful about when you roll your eyes. It's like when we rolled our eyes because he was saying that Obama wasn't born in the United States; he was born in Kenya. We all rolled our eyes. A couple years later, Barack Obama's got to release his birth certificate, and then they said it was a forgery. He really does, has all of a sudden, well, he's not all of a sudden because he's always talked about taking Greenland from 2016. These are things he really believes and wants to do. And we know he's got, both houses, the Supreme Court. Lord knows he'll be putting his, whether Hegseth makes it or not, but, somebody will be running the Department of Defense for him. And it won't be Miley or, any of those guys. So, rolling your eyes and thinking, oh, yeah, Canada, the 51st state. I'm with Trudeau on this. I think he said that I know that he's, exiting stage left, but he did say, like that's a pipe dream. Canada becoming part of the United States is just like a hallucination. But for Trump really, he'll keep trying to do it. And keep poking Canada, Mexico, the Gulf, Greenland, all of it. Like you said, it's bullying, but it's a power trip for him. And frankly, probably a lot of his supporters who think, yeah, let's go take Greenland. Okay. I mean, it's just going to be a question of, clearly his intent is to cross the line every single day. Look at where we are, and it's 2 weeks away. And so, get ready for that. But the way to get ready for that and the way to fight it is, I don't know, maybe it's a social network of 5 million people who are decidedly and unabashedly pro-democracy, who can agree on facts, agree on reality, become a information hub that those 5 million, remember the 3% that spew 33% of the toxic content and disinfo out there, or is it 80% of the disinfo? What I'm saying is, I know I just flubbed those stats, but what I'm saying is, okay, so imagine 5 million of us in a no bot, no bullshit social network where we don't have to agree on everything, but we can, within that network, build a community where we trust each other, even while we disagree, do it civilly, build it. And then when we get to 5 million, see if we can get to 10. But those 5 million, even at 5 million, their impact as they go across other social networks into X, into Blue Sky. I mean, we finally built a information hub to fight the disinformation Funhouse mirrors. And that's the more I looked at what happened and what I got wrong, the more, even though I saw all of this on the social networks, which is why I started Says Us like 10 months ago, too late. Too late to have the light go on. I wish it had gone on a couple of years ago. But now that it's gone on, I'm convinced that we all can really build something that's new, different. And if we don't, we will be living in Funhouse Mirrorland and non-reality with nothing to fight back. So I'm hopeful that we can and we will, and that's why I keep doing the podcast with Alex. That's why we work to Resolute Square, help get that going, and why we're fighting so hard to get Says Us off the ground. And we'll put links in there. Also, check out Get Real. That's another, I think, pretty interesting new site that I'm fascinated to learn more about, and actually hope that we can cross-promote each other and build together. Thanks, everyone, for listening to That Trippi Show. There is a better way. Says Us is live. Join us at says.us. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. The podcast will always be free and part of Resolute Square, so check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in a review on iTunes. We'll see you next week, and we'll put the links to the study in the article and to Get Real, as well as Says Us, in our show notes. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Resolute Square.